Hey, what's going on, baseball fans? Thanks for coming back and checking out another episode of the Going Yard podcast. Today we had an excellent interview with Rachel Luba. She is actually an attorney and now a certified agent for the MLB. Excellent conversation, a little different than we usually have on here, but it was definitely awesome. But before we get into that, I'm going to give a little love to the rope bat. The rope bat is the answer for those who are serious about the game by teaching a swing that maximizes centrifugal force and total body connected movement. The result is greater speed, strength, and consistency for the hitter.
This thing is incredible, honestly, because we took it to a tournament the other weekend and set it up, and kids were just struggling. And then once they figured it out, they got better. And I'll tell you, if you're working with any hitter, no matter the age, no matter the skill level, boy, girl, you should own one of these and have them take swings with it every couple days just to get back into feeling that full connective swing. Honestly, the thing's fantastic.
I'm not gonna lie, I struggle with it. I was like, no, I was trying to teach my kids, like, no, this is how you do it. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, throw me another one. Oh, throw me another one. But yeah, it's definitely awesome. So go to theropebat.com, enter the promo code GYP10, and get 10% off of your entire purchase at checkout. That's theropebat.com, GYP10, 10% off. So let's talk about this interview. Like I said, we talked to Rachel Luba. Definitely an excellent story because we didn't start off with our normal, hey, tell me about your baseball story, like we usually do in our baseball episodes. And we didn't talk about softball either. She's actually a gymnast. And she's also a boxer. She became a boxer later in life, and it's so cool because
how many attorneys are boxers?
Yeah, really.
Sorry,
I'm just thinking about her showing up to certain things and she has a behead. She's got a black eye. But it was so cool because although she doesn't play the sports that we usually talk about, an athlete is an athlete, and they all have a mindset, a go-getter attitude. They're determined, and that's what her entire career is basically based off of. She's determined. She's a woman working in a man's industry right now, and it doesn't care. She's doing it. And she went as far as going to law school. It's so cool to listen to this. And she talks about her interaction she has with the players, with the teams, arbitration, all that crazy stuff. And it was great.
Yeah, honestly, what's so cool is her love for the game of baseball started earlier. She talks about. And then the transition into the professional world and her professionalism that she's, used the motivation that she got from one meeting that you'll hear about to propel her into this working environment and the struggles and the ups and downs. It's not as glamorous as, everybody might think that it is. And she's just paving a new way and making it known that, there's nothing that's not possible. And that's what's fantastic about her and her fighting spirit and all of that. So that was the one thing I really took away from it. So fantastic interview. A little different than what we normally do, but fantastic.
Yep. And also we get into baseball contracts and negotiations, which is huge, especially this past year with all the free agents and all that good stuff and the contract extensions for the young guys. So I think you'll enjoy it. And make sure you share this with everybody in the baseball community. Hey, Rachel, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, hey guys, how's it going?
Going pretty good. Like I said before we started recording here, this is a really fun episode just because we've never had someone on here that does what you do. So the question's going to be a little different than they normally are. But I think a lot of people get a lot out of it, and I think it'll be pretty fun. So thank you for definitely taking the time to join us.
Absolutely. No problem.
Hey, Rachel, it's Tyler. Really appreciate you doing this. I think we saw a video on Instagram the other week, you talking to Trevor Bauer, I guess, right, about your work that you're doing now. And I was like, hey, you would be fantastic to join us to talk about your perspective on what you're doing now. So thanks for getting back in touch with us and doing this. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Excited.
So normally we kind of start with people's baseball or softball stories, but yours is a little different in your route to the work you're doing now. You want to talk a little bit about some of the sports maybe you played growing up and some of the activities you were involved in that ultimately led you to college to participate in college in athletics in college?
Yeah, so growing up, although I work in baseball now, I think I played t-ball when I was like 5 or something. That's about the extent of any sort of baseball experience that I have playing. But I was a gymnast from the age of 2 all the way through college. Competed the national level, international, and then ended up competing at UCLA as well. So that was how I ended up in athletics in college, and I got to know a lot of baseball players there. And I guess kind of what led me into what I do now is I always knew, one, as a gymnast, that you can't, you can't really make a living off of it. It's not baseball, it's not basketball, football, hockey. There are very few that can make any money at it. Mm-hmm. So I always knew, like, growing up, like, how to do really well in school, all sorts of stuff like that, like be very organized, and have a career outside of gymnastics, even though I dedicated like my entire life to that growing up. So I knew I wanted to work in sports. I was always drawn to the individual athlete, I think, just because I was always an individual athlete. I box now and fight, and I guess, that's an individual sport as well. So the individual athlete is what has drawn me. A lot of people are really drawn towards like team sports, and they want to work on the team side of things. But for me, I knew I wanted to work with the individual athlete. And so I got to know a lot of UCLA baseball players while I was a gymnast at UCLA. And that's kind of like where my baseball journey really began.
Nice. Well, I want to dive a little bit into it, just because even though you didn't play baseball or softball, like most of the people that we talk to, an athlete is an athlete, and you have a certain mindset, and there's a lot of dedication, determination that goes into it, hard work. So we're going to dive into just a few questions about that, being an athlete, if you don't mind. So the one thing, I have a daughter, and I'm putting in quotes, she tried gymnastics, and she realized pretty quickly that this is not something she wanted to do. But as a parent, I saw how demanding the sport was in terms of having to, practice, and because you have to become a stronger person, you have to become really strong to be a gymnast. And then, it was a few hour practice, a couple times a week. And I'm just curious, do you think that determination was built from starting gymnastics so early in life? Do you think that's probably what put you on the path to having a strong desire, strong work ethic, and allow you to follow your path and stay on path?
Yeah, no doubt. I would say that was one of, I have a love-hate relationship with the sport of gymnastics, because I'm sure, as you guys know, it's very demanding. A lot of sacrifice at a really young age. And there's a lot of like corrupt kind of issues with the sport in general. Mm-hmm. So my childhood, was very different from most. And there's a lot that it's hard to look back and to resent things, but there's a lot that I do resent of the sport. But that being said, there are still like some very good things that I got out of the sport that I don't resent. It makes it hard to resent the sport. And that one of those being, I think, my work ethic and my discipline. I went to a college prep, school all through like kindergarten through high school, took AP classes, always had like over a 4.0. I was able to finish actually like at UCLA. I finished a year early. And then in law school, I finished like a semester early there too. So I've always been like, also while being an athlete. And when I was in law school, I was training for like boxing fights as well. So like I've always been very disciplined, and I've always been very like goal oriented. And, I've always wanted to kind of push myself and achieve things, I guess, that seem kind of out of reach for most people. So I would say like 100% that was from gymnastics.
Now, the one thing I always like to ask, because it doesn't, matter what sport you are, if you're in college playing, it really doesn't matter what level, because they all kind of expect the same demanding schedule of, class and practice, weightlifting sessions. How did you manage that? And then you just kind of brought up that you graduated early. I mean, what was that like, trying to balance, nutrition, which is a huge deal in gymnastics, staying healthy, education, practices, weight training? How did you balance and manage all that?
So, to be honest, in college, I thought that was the easiest part for me. Like my childhood and
Wow.
my childhood growing up, the time management, the discipline that I had to have, all of that stuff was so much more difficult, I think, because, I'm going to a college prep, school. They expect a lot. They give a lot of homework, but they have absolutely no clue really about my gymnastics training, right? I go in before classes start to condition, at 6 a.m. And then, when I'm done with school, I go straight to the gym and I'll get home till 10:30 p.m., but my school has no idea. So I have to figure out how to kind of manage all of that. And then, my gymnastics, like my coaches they couldn't really care less about my school. So once I got to college, I think that's where it became a lot easier for me, just because everyone's kind of working together. You have the athletic department is very involved. You have your tutors, like they're all trying to help you. So it's like one pretty big, like cohesive team. So to be honest, I thought college was the easiest. You have your nutrition, like everyone's working together, your tutors, your nutritionists, your coaches, your professors. But I would say growing up, it forced me to figure it out, like to be in charge of everything and to make sure that everything's taken care of and not to rely on anybody else to take care of it.
Now, the sports that you've been involved with, gymnastics and boxing, those are two sports, like you had said, that's something you're working with yourself, and you're basically competing against yourself and you're keeping yourself focused, all that stuff. Obviously, Tyler had talked about staying healthy, not only physically, but also mentally. I know you said when you got to college, it was a lot easier for you on the workload. But in terms of the mental, like how did you stay focused? Because those are both sports where you have to be there, you have to be present. You have to be in the moment. You can't be out in left field. Distraction can't bother you. How did you stay away from that? The distractions. How did you manage to do all of that and still be able to perform?
Right. I mean, I think, again, like just growing up all those years of being so disciplined, like it wasn't anything new for me. Mm-hmm. I guess, sure. Like, I mean, going to college, that's new. You have the distractions of, you're living on your own now and you can party and all of that kind of fun stuff. But, my parents, growing up, my parents were never super strict. Like they weren't the crazy parents that made me, like that forced me to, do a sport or anything like that. All they cared about was that, if I wasn't going to do gymnastics, I had to pick something else to, keep myself active after school or whatever. But it was always me. Like it had to come from me. So it's always kind of come from me. There's times like I know when I'm in season for gymnastics, for example, like I don't go out. Like I don't really seeing friends a little like it. I didn't do that as much even in college. I didn't go out at night, those kinds of things. And then you have, once it's like the off season, granted, like we train all year round, but when there aren't like competitions or anything like that, I give myself a little more, leeway to have fun and whatnot. Same thing though in law school. When I was training for a fight, there would be like a 2-month period where, all my friends would ask, are you coming out to the bars tonight? And I just had to kind of bite the bullet and, say no. And I had tons of, roommates and friends who were like, don't you have FOMO? Like, don't you want to come out? Like, how do you just say no? And I think just my whole life having to say no for, sports or whatnot, just kind of, I don't know, it was nothing new to me. And I was fine with it.
And you had said I think it was in law school, you started learning the box and you started boxing and competing, doing that. Actually, I guess you said it was UCLA. You started doing that, but I'm just curious. Like, how did that all come about? I mean, it's just weird that you're looking at gymnastics, and all of a sudden boxing. Like, I just don't know anybody just signs up for that later in life.
Not
it's so crazy.
Not taekwondo, like straight boxing. Like
I'd love to know how that all came about.
Yeah, just kind of random, to be honest. I have a good friend of mine too, who's a professional boxer, and I remember one of the first things he asked me when I had first met him, and he was like, "Why do you box?" And he was so confused, and I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Why?" I was like, "I mean, why?" I was like, "Why do you box?" He's like, "Cause I mean, look at me, like look where I came from." He's like, "I have to." He's like, I don't understand. Like, you don't need to box. Like, people who box, they need to box. Like, they have to get out of their, whatever circumstances or whatnot. He's like, I don't get it. But yeah, so mine, I started. So when I finished gymnastics, my body was pretty beat up, obviously, but I didn't know. So I started kind of like working out, obviously, just because I was so used to, training so much. So I feel like there are two types of people when they stop gymnastics. The ones that never want to do anything physical for like a very long time. They're like, nope, I did that my entire life. And, if I have to walk more than 100 yards, like I'm out. They don't want to do anything physical. Or the ones that just are so used to training all the time that they pick up something else. So I didn't like the idea. I started kind of, I don't know, working out in the gym. But it was a weird, like, it was so unmotivating to be working out with no purpose.
Right.
So I thought about, well, what about CrossFit? So I started doing CrossFit a little, and I was home actually, like, during one break, and my dad's a doctor. So one of his like orthopedic surgeon friends, this young guy, I guess, like held this CrossFit that he did out of his own garage, with like a bunch of people he knew. So my dad was like, "Hey, like, why don't you go try CrossFit with them?" So I did. And like one night after CrossFit, the orthopedic surgeon, who apparently like happened to be an MMA fighter, he was like, do you want to mess around on the like mitts with me a little and box? I was like, okay, sure. Like, I had no idea. I had never boxed before, but I was like, all right, it'll be fun. So I started doing it, and, I worked with him for like an hour, and I loved it. Like, there was something really exciting and kind of thrilling about like hitting things. And I guess he kind of saw like some talent in me. And he kind of like at the end of that night, he's like smiling. He's like, all right. He's like, I'm going to turn you into a fighter. And I was like, no, like, I'm not trying to fight anyone and like make this, like, do it like that. And like, lo and behold, obviously I should have known that just my personality, like everything I do has to be a competition. Like it has to be at the most extreme level. So within like 6 months, I was already like, registering for my first fight. And it's kind of how I got into it.
Now, they always say like a good plan, until you get punched in the face, right? I mean, what was that first instance like? I mean, when you had to take lunch, what's that like for the person who hasn't done it?
Listen, like, boxing's one of the greatest workouts. Like, I recommend it for everyone. I got my ass, like kicked in gymnastics my entire life. And there was no feeling like going 3 rounds boxing. So like, I always recommend it, but there's a difference between boxing just for a workout and when you actually have to fight somebody. Like, I remember the first few weeks when I was boxing, I was like, some of the other people I trained with were sparring, and I could watching them and I'm like, I want to do it. Like, I want to get in the ring. And my coach was like, no, like, you're not ready. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, when you're first doing it, you spend like several weeks just working on, on the mitts and, hitting bags. You think you're a pro. You're like, look, I'm freaking good at this. Like, there's no problem. He's like, you don't understand. He was like, one of two things happen when someone gets into the ring. He was like, the second someone is throwing a punch back at you, he was like, you're either going to freeze and be like, yeah, no, I'm out. Like, that's it. He's like, or you're going to just, it will ignite some like fire in you to, kind of like survival of the fittest. Like, you will fight for your life. He's like, but if you're not ready and like you need to trust me, he's like, you're not ready yet, then you're just going to freeze. And he's like, I don't want that. So I was so eager to get in the ring. And, he made me wait a lot longer than I thought was necessary, but he was right. And that first punch back, it definitely like stunned me for a sec. I was like, whoa, like you forget everything. And suddenly like, it's so different the second that bag is throwing punches back at you, Mm-hmm. But I think just from the years of like competing and, whatnot, it took the first punch kind of stunned me, but the second that the punch didn't really land on me, but just the act of it coming at me stunned me. But once like the second punch, I remember it hit me in the face, and that's when the spark kind of ignited for me, and I was like, oh hell no, like I'm gonna fight back. And so that's what it was for me. It was like getting hit,
and your adrenaline all pumping, and it's gotta be intense.
Now let's dive a little bit into law school and how that came about, and why you decided you wanted to go to law school. And what was the driving force behind it? Because you talked earlier about there's not much. You can't have a career in the sport you were in. So what made you ultimately decide that law school was the way for you to go?
Right. So again, like I was saying, when I got to college, like I always knew I wanted to work in sports, and I wanted to work with the individual athlete. It took a little bit of time, kind of. I'd say by like my second year, I started to I formed a lot of close like friendships with a lot of the baseball players. They lived on the same floor as me in the dorms, and I grew up with 3 brothers, so I was always used to like hanging out with guys. So got to know them pretty well, and realized that I started to kind of see like, so some of them would go off and they would get drafted after their junior year and whatnot, and I realized that it seemed like out of all the sports, I knew football players, I knew basketball players. There just seemed like a lot of missed opportunities to make money off the field. Just kind of like inefficiencies in like the way I saw their agents kind of worked. And so I got this idea, I think I want to be an agent. And I ended up talking to one of my like closest friends, sat me down. He like set up a meeting with his agent. And this was my last year at UCLA. And I told him like, look, this is what I want to do. And I just wanted to pick his brain. And he was like pretty arrogant, like puts his feet up on his desk. And he was like, all right, listen. It's like, seems like you know what you want. He's like, so I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. He's like, you're a girl. And he just kind of like stopped, and I just stared at him. I was like, yeah, I'm well aware. Thanks. He was like, well, I was like, is that what you got for me? And he was like, well, all I'm saying is like, he's like, look, it's not like you're not welcome in this industry, but you kind of aren't. He was like, because you're a female. So my best advice, he's like, would be if you want any credibility whatsoever, he's like, get a law degree. So it kind of annoyed me at first. I was just like, what the heck is this guy's problem? But I was like, you know what? Fine. I'm going to go to law school. So that was, it literally took like one conversation like that. And I walked out of there and I was set on, I was going to start researching law schools and go to law school. So that was how I ended up, in law school. And I like all my applications, my personal statements and whatnot were all written exactly about this. Like, I'm not going to law school to, work and practice big law, corporate law, to, go, I don't know, save the world. I'm just like, I want to be an agent, and I want to be a female. Like, I want to be one of the first like female agents.
Now, for our listeners, could you let everyone know your actual title and what you actually do today? What do you do on a day in, day out basis?
Yeah. So, I'm an attorney. I used to work for the union, the Players Association, helping do their salary arbitration cases. So everything from like valuing players that go through salary arbitration to putting together the hearings and to actually conducting, like carrying out the hearings. So I did that for a bit, and now I'm just kind of doing I've done a lot of consulting with contracts and salary arbitration and whatnot as well, but recently got certified as an agent as well. So that's kind of what I do. I guess my title is just, I am technically a certified agent now, I guess.
Now, in professional baseball, there's probably not too many things that are more ugly than salary arbitration, right? I mean, is it really as ugly kind as it gets reported in the media?
Yes and no. Look, it's not fun. No player wants to go in there and be told like why he sucked. And I mean, they spin up a case sometimes, like they can portray stats that even aren't that relevant, that just make you look really bad.
Right.
But even a lot of times the players that end up in hearing are the ones that didn't have the best season. The Lindors and whatnot of the world, like they're settling, they're not ending up in a hearing. And the Kershaws, are signing early, pre-arb deals that, they avoid arbitration altogether. But traditionally, the players that ended up in hearings were the ones that, trying to think, you have Syndergaard, right, who was a stud in his first 2 years, and then his platform year, which is the most recent year, right before the hearing, or your arbitration year, he's injured for most of the season. So, like, that's an ugly kind of case, right? So traditionally, those were the guys that ended up in hearings. So it was easier just to pick on them because it was guys that, might have been, you have the Michael Fulmers, right, that won Rookie of the Year their first year. And then by the time they get to arbitration, like they have one of the worst years ever. So it's changing though. Now you see more often players like Mookie Betts, right, who was at the top of his class, his arbitration class, who is going to hearing because he's trying to kind of break that barrier, that salary kind of threshold that, where the past markets have been stuck at. So it's harder for them. Like there weren't that many bad things to say about Mookie in his hearing, right? Because he was a stud. So that's where I say yes and no. Like a lot of times the players that end up in hearing, they've had tough seasons and they know that. And so it's just whether kind of you're willing to, you're going to hear for the next 2 or 3 hours them tell you about how bad you were, but you already knew. Like that's no surprise to you. You knew that. And there are some cases where teams can be ruthless and it can get ugly. But for the most part, it's business, and it's usually nothing that neither side hasn't already heard.
Yeah. I mean, not everybody's Josh Donaldson coming off an MVP season and can just break the bank and kind of, set the tone for what they're going to have to do because there's no real argument against the MVP of the league.
Right.
Can you just talk us through, because it's kind of something that not too many people probably know about. What is the process of actually becoming an agent? I mean, everybody just kind of looks at some of the big name agents and kind of how much power and control they have in sports, or some of these big conglomerate groups that kind of have all these players. But what is the actual process behind the scenes from, all right, you go to law school, you get your attorney degree, you do this. What is that process like on the backside for you to actually get your agent license and get certified to basically work in that place of employment and that space?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of different for everyone. Everyone has a different path to breaking in, I guess. Some are attorneys, some aren't. I would say if you're a female trying to do it, you probably should, as much as I hated that advice, probably should get your law degree. It's helpful for sure. But ultimately, a lot of people kind of start you want to get your foot in the door, usually, like, let's say at an agency, and you're doing kind of the bitch work. You're, setting up their car shipments, from wherever their off-season home is to spring training and things like that, like not fun stuff.
Right.
But that's usually kind of where people start. I interned at an agency, did all of that. Super fun. But you pay your dues. So you kind of start there, usually work your way up. And then ultimately, like, to become an agent. So usually an agency that you're working at or whatever will kind of sponsor you or pay you pay a fee to the union. You have to run a whole background check on you. And then you have to go take, like, twice a year, the union offers an exam, the agent exam. So you have to go to New York City for one of the sittings of it. I think there's one in August, like one in January. I took the January one this last year. But you go and you take the agent exam, and if you pass it, then it's like that. I mean, that's kind of the process of becoming an agent. But yeah, I mean, everyone kind of has, I guess, different paths. I figured, so it's also really hard when you first break in, even at these big agencies, right? There are a lot of agents that you would think are relatively big names that aren't even really getting a percentage of the contracts of these players, right? Like, it's usually just at a lot of these agencies, like, there's one guy at the top that's getting the cut, and the rest a lot of them are on salary. So, like, it's not as glamorous and, money filled as, like, people I think right. For everybody. But I kind of also try to figure out, and I talked to Trevor Bauer about this a lot, just about when I was first, in law, or like when I was finishing up law school, like, what's the best way to kind of break in? And I figured, like, a lot of times a lot of agencies won't bring you on to work for them unless you're bringing a client too. Because, like, essentially you need to bring them a client that's going to make them money that will cover your salary, kind of thing. Because otherwise, like, why are they going to pay you to get to know their clients? So, like, maybe you could steal them, whatever. Right. So, it's unless you bring them a client, kind of thing, it's really hard to get into an agency. And then, everyone, like, even at some of these big agencies like CAA and stuff, like, if I'm going to start working there, even if I'm an attorney, I'm getting paid. I mean, I interviewed at CAA right after law school, and as an attorney, like, they were offering me, it was like $13 an hour or something. And you work in the mailroom. So, like, it's not glamorous. Even if you are an attorney, you're no better than anybody else there. You start at the very bottom and nobody gives a shit. That you have a law degree or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I was trying to kind of figure out, like, is there a better way, or, like, can I become an expert in an area, a unique area, if I'm not going to just go and try to, like, steal clients and bring clients to an agency? Like, is there a better way? So that was where I kind of decided to focus on arbitration, just because it's a unique area that, to be honest, most agencies, they don't know much about it. They're not very experienced in it. We have, like, the baseball has a few expert agent advisors. There are a few attorneys basically who they represent agents. And they do a lot of times the arbitration cases. So they'll do, like, 7 or 8 a year. And they put together all the cases for the agent. So, to be honest, like, a lot of agencies don't really know much about actually going to hearing. So it's a unique kind of skill set to have, which is why I focused on that, in order to have something different that kind of could make me more valuable, without having all the years of just, like, experience and working, from the bottom.
Wow, when the whole time you're talking about this, all I could think of, like Tyler said, a lot of us don't really know what agents, how to become an agent, or really what a lot of them do. I mean, the extent of what we know is from that show Arliss back in the '90s, and what was that movie? Jerry Maguire, Show Me the Money. That's all we really know of agents. So this might be kind of an elementary question here, but I really would love to know. So in terms of workload, I know you said that when you come to an agency, a lot of them want you to bring a client. Once you become that agent and you're part of this agency, as for workload, how many clients do you have? Or do you just try to focus on one and do it right and then decide to blossom out and have more people, under your belt? I'm just curious how that goes.
Yeah. So, I mean, at big agencies, usually I'd say each agent, first of all, you have a ton of staff usually that handle a lot of the, you have interns that are doing, everything from just the miscellaneous stuff that you have to handle, that you help handle for players. But each agent probably has, a handful of clients. It can vary depending on the size of the agency. But, they're focusing. Smaller agencies, right, are going to have a few big name clients that they're going to put all their kind of resources and efforts into. The bigger agencies, they have more staff, but, they have usually, I would say, one or two people kind of managing or handling, maybe anywhere from 5 to 15 or 20 different guys. And, they're just everything from during season. It's a lot. You're dealing with if people obviously get DFA'd, right? Trying to help them figure out the next move. Spring training, a lot of that happens. During season, a lot of the stuff is just kind of client maintenance, usually checking in. Sometimes, there's communication barriers break down between the player and the team, and you kind of have to interface there. If a player has an issue with how they're being played or whatever like that, agents will usually step in, try to be intermediary kind of between them and the front office. But season is definitely, I would say, the slowest part. That's more of the off season. And then once the off season starts, that's when things get crazy for agents.
Gotcha. That's like your tax time, basically, if you were an accountant.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so I got to ask because I have no clue. I've never seen one, never been a part of it. When I think about a player's contract, I kind of think in my mind a mortgage. When you're going to sign, how many times you're going to sign your life away. Anything can go into a player's contract, from incentive bonuses to all these different things. What is that, like where some of those things get put into place, or incentive bonuses, all-star appearances, Cy Young Award, for the big-time athletes, obviously. But then, there's some of these guys that are struggling along in the minor leagues that are kind of fighting for their next contract as well all the time. But what's the typical, contract? Is it 2 pages, 3 pages? Is it 50? I have no earthly idea.
They're not that long, just a few, several pages, I would say. It depends if it's a free agent contract or just, your standard. But so actually, the MLB and the PA have an agreed upon, uniform contract. So it's a pretty standard contract. And then there are various, there are certain kinds of covenants, I guess, that you can negotiate in. But it's not just you don't just kind of build it. Everyone's is different, and some are super long. It's a very standard thing, but then there's obviously, the length, options, amount, those kinds of things. And then, so MLB contracts, you can negotiate in, performance bonuses, but that's for, innings pitched or plate appearances, things like that, right? Bulk kind of things. But, in terms of just playing, but you cannot have bonuses such as like if your ERA is below this, or if you hit X amount of home runs, there's a bonus. However, in like the NPB, like over in Japan, you can negotiate in those kinds of bonuses. So a lot of times for guys like struggling in AAA or whatnot, like going to Asia is a good alternative, because one, they take care of you. You make way more money than you're going to make in AAA, and you can negotiate in, kind of these like performance bonuses that you can't have in MLB. So that's kind of, I guess, the difference. But I mean, and there's, various like miscellaneous things that you can negotiate in, suites on the road or things like that, or a parking spot. But in general, like it's pretty standard.
I have two things to say. One, I didn't know about that, why players go over and play overseas. I didn't know that, so that was actually really cool for me to learn. And two, the next time I buy a house, I'm going to go to the table and say, that Major League Baseball players' contracts are a lot smaller than this, and they're getting paid so much more than you are.
Yeah. No, most other contracts, like I read through them and I'm just like, it's a lot of just BS that, to be honest, like I think they just like they throw so much in there so that they can hide in really small print, like really important clauses or like sentences, or whatever, that'll, that could screw you over, that you'll never read because there's so much writing in most of the contracts.
Yeah.
Now, I've got to know, what, in your opinion, what's it going to take to change the landscape of sports agency from the female perspective? I mean, you just not too many years ago had this conversation with this player's agent, and you're kind of just breaking through. You haven't obviously been doing this for 2 or 3 decades yet, but what do you think what's it going to take? Is it going to take players accepting females to represent them, or is it going to take agencies hiring more females? What is it going to take to change the landscape a little bit for what you're doing to be a little bit more acceptable at that level?
That's a good question. I don't know what it's gonna like. I mean, I'm here to figure out what it's gonna take and to kind of help break that barrier for women. But there are a lot of crossroads that, or that I've had to cross already, or that I know I'm going to cross in the future, just because it's so unique. And there's a lot of scenarios that I guess this sport in general hasn't had to deal with having a female kind of in the industry. They do more so on the club side now, the team side, which is a good thing. Like it's much more diverse now in the front offices. But the agent side, it's a good question because, so Trevor actually, when I was in law school, I told him, I was like, do you think that players are actually like hesitant or afraid to hire a female as an agent? And he was like, I'm not. He was like, but let me ask the guys in the clubhouse. And he surveyed them for me and just would ask them, like, look, if you have a female agent who is literally just as qualified as this male, like, they know the exact same amount, blah, 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 like, would you hire her? And to be honest, every player was pretty open to the idea. They didn't have a problem with it. Where I find like the biggest problem is agents themselves. Like I spent so much time, especially in the beginning, trying to sell myself to agencies. But really, like when I took a step back, I was like, well, hold on. Like with what my job is, like I don't need to convince an agent to hire me to then try to convince players to let me sign them as clients. Like my clients, my target should be the player, right? Not I put in, so much effort, just energy trying to convince like agents that it's okay. And it's always been polarizing no matter what. And I think that's always going to be a thing. I think, look, like it's different. It's unique. It's kind of terrifying for a lot of agents. But it's never a neutral factor at this point, because every agent either looks at it as like, that's really unique, I like it, we can use it to our advantage, or they're like, nope, that's never going to work. Like you don't have a chance. Like we can't, bring you on. So, I mean, maybe like once women the more you have them in the industry, like it'll be more accepted. I don't know. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard for, I think in the beginning, just for a while, because the people that seem to be the most hesitant are like the agents themselves. So unless maybe you have more players that are just willing to hire like females on their own kind of thing, like to represent them, and then that'll become more acceptable, and then agents will be okay with it. But the agents seem to be the biggest roadblock to me.
Now, I was curious about this. So, in today's world, players are getting signed younger and younger. I mean, I think the Orioles just signed a 16-year-old from the Dominican. And, it's happening all the time. And they're talented as ever. And they're getting contract extensions before they even set foot on a major league field. Do you see this becoming the new norm in the future? I mean, obviously it makes sense. I mean, people are signing extensions and they're coming to the end of their contracts and they're still young, so it's, I feel like it makes sense, but I'm just curious from your point of view, do you think this is going to be something that's going to be the new norm going forward?
Yeah, for a while, I think, until something in the CBA changes, because now you have a lot of players, right, with current state of baseball, like they're scared to become free agents because, look, like front offices got smarter. They started using, analytics, and they realized like it doesn't make sense to pay a player for what their past performance and then sign them to a really long deal that, on the back end, like is, they're not getting what they paid for. It makes more sense to look at the numbers and pay a guy like, look, they appreciate everything he did in the past. That's great. But we want to know, like, we're going to pay you for what we can project you are going to do in the future. And so now, like, with the way that the CBA is currently, you have teams that are controlling guys for, their first 6 years. I mean, which really, like, that's the prime of most of these guys' careers. And up until your 3 years before you hit arbitration eligibility, you're getting paid the major league minimum, which is around right now like $550,000, which I don't think people realize. Like Aaron Judge is making $550,000, a year. He's not making millions.
Right.
Of course, off the field he is. So you have a lot of younger players, right, that you saw. Oh my God, you saw it this off season where it was like all these guys before their free agency, or who are, still controlled by teams, signing these, 6-7 year deals because they were like, they're scared. Like, who knows what's going to happen in free agency? So a lot of guys are, taking, which, is unfortunate, and like on the same, it's unfortunate as well because they're taking a discount, right, for the security of, having that security for the next like 6 years. But what a lot of these like young guys that are stars that are approached, right, at an early age or like, early in their career to sign a long-term contract is they really like, if they bet on themselves, which a lot of times, like, you have athletes often they will bet on themselves. Like they will make so much more money than what they're going to get paid, if they sign a deal right now. But then a lot of times, when they're super early on in their careers and they don't have a lot of money in the bank, and especially the Latin guys, right, they like, if you offer them, $10 million, $50 million, especially like some of the Latin guys, that's life changing. I mean, it's life changing for anybody, but like some of these guys with where they come from. So, like teams are getting really good team friendly deals right now. And, I think until something changes with how long teams will actually be able to control players,
service time, those type of things coming up. Yeah.
I mean, personally, I think it should be less than 5 or than 6 years. Or at least an arbitration, like, I love arbitration, but I think that it's a very like antiquated process. I will admit that. It's very stagnant. It's really hard to move the market because you can only compare people to, I can only compare, this player to similar, like comparable players in the past, like, let's say 3 to 5 years or, most recently, right? Players, and then how much did they get? So, and then those players, how they ended up at their salary by comparing themselves to guys 5 years or 3 years prior to that and what they got. So like the market hasn't moved very much, right? Like in the last 20 years, these guys who are performing, at whatever level are making pretty much the same amount as guys 15 years prior who were performing at that level. But, if you think about just basic economics, like 15 years later, the market, there's inflation, like the market should move a little.
Yeah,
but it hasn't.
It hasn't moved like free agency market kind of moved. Like more money is available in free agency than in the arbitration process. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Right. So, I think maybe you need to change that, right? Like how we're valuing players in arbitration, at least to get them some more money earlier on.
I mean, do you think that we're headed to a lockout? I mean, if you had to guess in your gut feeling right now, thinking about players that you may be working with, is it time for some of them maybe to start planning on not playing baseball for a little bit here in the future?
Yeah, I think I think to not plan would be not a wise decision.
Yeah, I mean,
it should be definitely in the back of their minds. That look, there's not much left to bargain with. So, but it's hard. Like, how do you, ask some of these players, right, that are making a lot of money, like that, to forfeit, their income for, maybe a whole year for what might not ultimately really benefit them that much, but it's going to be for the greater good of the sport. So that's kind of what you're trying to ask.
I mean, me and Dan, we grew up, we remember the lockout, the last one that killed it. It lost half a season. It destroyed baseball for a while. And then it took a while to recover. I mean, in this day and age, I don't think any major sport, should take that risk. I really just don't. I mean, I don't, at least from the outsider looking in at it, I think there's too many alternatives for fans to turn to in this day and age for you to just, act like fans will come back and diehards will be there. But it took hockey a long time to recover. It took baseball a long time to recover. And with everything going digital and all these different things, I'm just not. Who knows what the future is going to look like of, market shares and all that. But it seems scary. And it just looks like we're headed for a collision course with what's going on with some of these younger players and what you see some of these people just, what they're going to fight for and what they're standing up for. And I get it. I mean, that's their right. That's why you have a players union to battle for you. But, man, it just seems awfully scary looking from the outside in.
Right. No, like, listen, I hear both sides of it, and I see, like, I know players on both sides of it too, that, players that already have their financial security, and they're like, well, do I really want to give up, millions of dollars so that, like, it's not really changing for me, but, and then you have the younger players, right? Like, it's a scary kind of thing. And then, a lot of them looking at it too, like they're still making a lot of money, but if you think about, in comparison to what teams are making and, they're fair, like what they should be paying these players, or at least like, paying the younger players, and, maybe there's less right on the back end, but is it worth fighting for? Because they're going to have to give up a lot to fight for it. And like you said, with just baseball in general is kind of losing a lot of popularity, especially with the younger generation, I think. I mean, if you look at the average age of, the baseball fan, it's old compared to other sports. And it's not, and I think that's MLB's fault too. They haven't done a good job at, marketing players, marketing the sport, making it exciting for younger kids. Like, kids want social media. They want those like hype videos. They want that 15-second clip of just sick things that happen, right? Like sick plays. That's what they want. And, MLB makes that really difficult. And I know that's why like Trevor Bauer has started his media company Momentum, because, he's trying to, help brand players, because MLB just doesn't do a good job. If you look at in comparison to what, the NBA does and what the NFL does, they've got a long ways to go. So yeah, it's scary. It's a scary thought to think like, you're going to alienate your fans even more.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny you had said that about the average age. It's probably right around Tyler and I's age, the average age watching, because that's like the last time that baseball was really exciting to watch was when him and I were 15, 16 years old. But so we wanted to ask you about this. We're starting to wind down a little bit. What are some of your goals in the next 3 to 5 years, professionally, even personally, and even with boxing as well?
Well, probably once I get more settled into maybe a city, like not moving, I'm constantly traveling, and then doing some more fighting in some more boxing fights. I've kind of slowed that down a little, just like the actual fighting part, because of traveling. But in terms of, professionally and like in the baseball industry, I think just, the big ones are, changing, like not being afraid to, make changes or, kind of fight for changes in the industry, like where I see inefficiencies. I think baseball is really stuck in its ways in a lot of different areas of the sport. So, just because this is how things have always been done, and whether like this is how it's always been, like we haven't had women in the industry or whatever, like, look, like just not being afraid to, fight to see changes in that. And, if I find more efficient ways to do things, like, so be it, like not being afraid to, push for that, because I think the sport could use, some improving, on the business side, especially. So, just hopefully seeing more women in the industry. Got a great network of, even a few female scouts that I know, and, women on the team side, and, the few that are in it stick together. So, hopefully expanding the number of women that are in the sport, and, helping players, make better use of their off the field, personalities and branding, and, fighting to get these players, paid what they deserve.
That is awesome. One thing we've been really trying to do here, and this has kind of been a great question for us in a lot of our interviews, because it's helped us set things up. If there was a person that you could recommend, whether it be coach, player, whoever you think that could add value to the Going Yard podcast, who would you recommend that we reach out to have a future interview with?
Oh man. I think, so one of my good friends, she's another female in the industry, but she is a scout. She's on the scouting side. She's on the team side. I think she could be a really unique, just another, again, female perspective on things, but on, the team side, the scouting side, she's an awesome person. So I could, her name's Astrid DeGrecci.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I think it would be added, like you said, just a different perspective.
And we love it because we're dads of daughters. So like anything that like can open the doors of like our daughter's eyes in a way in the future is fantastic for us. You know what I mean? So it's kind of cool. Like no matter what they do, that's super cool to us.
Yeah, that's awesome. Your daughters are lucky. They've got good fathers.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
As we're winding down here, for anybody who wants, where can people find you on social media to see what you're doing? You're always posting pictures of traveling from stadium to stadium and being with other players. Where can people find you on social media to follow along on your journey and what you're doing?
Yeah, so mostly I would say my Instagram. I don't use Twitter that much. I mostly use it to follow baseball news, but that's about it. But my handle is Lubes World, so Lubes World. That is probably the best place on social media.
Excellent. Well, it's been great. I have one more question for you. And normally we ask if you had one at bat in a professional softball game or Major League Baseball game, what song would you choose as a walk-up song? But in this case, we're going to say this. You had one fight in a professional boxing match. What song would you use as your walkout song to the ring?
I would use Victory. That's always been my go-to by Diddy and Notorious. B.I.G.
Excellent. We were grooving to this earlier today. This brings back memories of like 9th grade of listening to this like almost every single day. So that's awesome. Good choice. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and sharing everything that you're doing because it's something we've never heard before. And I had so many questions about it that I didn't even have written down. And, I'm glad we got to talk to you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Best of luck with everything in the future and moving forward. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us and do this.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. See you later.
All right. Have a good one.
Too smart for these cats while they making up facts. You making up plaques. In the commission, you ask for permission to hit him. He don't like me, hit him while wifey was with him. You heard of us, the murderers.
All right. I hope you guys like that. I know it was a little different. We've never done anything like that before on the baseball side of it, but I think it needed to be done, man. I thought it was a cool thing, and I'm glad you reached out to her.
Hey, look, I mean, I'll tell you, it may be different, but this woman deserves her respect. She deserves her time to speak about what she's doing. It's groundbreaking. It's innovative. She's a fighter, obviously. I mean, in what she does. And I think what she's doing deserves a platform. It deserves to be heard. And I appreciate her doing it, honestly. She doesn't have to. But I thought it was fantastic. I learned a lot. I learned a lot from it. I hope everybody listening to this does as well.
Well, I think it's funny because it's like I'd asked that question about why would you choose to go to boxing, later in life, because not a lot of people sign up to get punched in the face when they're out of college or, it's like.
No, and like it's one thing
crazy.
to go do sparring or it's one thing to do training. Everybody does jujitsu to stay in shape. It's another thing to go do a jujitsu competition. It's another thing to do boxing, or CrossFit, like she said. It's another thing to go get punched in the face in a real arena, in a real, a real match, in a real. What am I thinking of? What's the
ring?
Ring. Thank you,
Lord.
I'm thinking of octagon. I'm thinking of UFC fighting for some reason in my head. But it's another thing to actually go do that and put it into practice. And man, what energy she has, honestly, for what she's doing. And I mean, she kind of asked the question about, why wouldn't you want to hire a female? I mean, if you're going to go take punches and throw punches, you're the kind of person I want representing me.
Well, yeah,
you know what I mean?
She's like she's an underdog, man. It's awesome. Like I think I read she's only 5'1".
Yeah.
She was a gymnast, so she's tiny.
Yeah.
And it's just like, man, to go and be that tough, to go in there, she enters into a world that's filled with dominant by males.
She ain't never going to back down, right?
She's not backing down.
Never.
Yeah. So it was awesome.
Ever.
So
Rachel, thank you.
This is probably our longest outro ever, but I thought it was awesome. But I hope you guys enjoyed that. As always, find us on all things social media at Going Yard Podcast and on Twitter at GYP Podcast. And again, if you like what we're doing, check out all our Patreon page. If you go to patreon.com/Going Yard Podcast, you can find out how you could help us week in and week out, and we would greatly appreciate that.
You can find all those links that Dan just got done talking about on our website, goingyardpodcast.com. You can Google us, Going Yard Podcast. You can find everything as well. You can subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, Podbean, and Google Play. Leave us a 5-star review if you could. That way we can climb those podcast rankings.
That's right, and that's a wrap for this episode. So for Rachel Luba and all of us here at the Going Yard Podcast, I'm Dan.
And I'm Tyler. See ya.
Later.